If you just plant as many seeds, do as many licenses as possible, some of them will pan out, some of them won't, and the marketplace will determine success or failure.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how federal laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. Our guest today is a pioneer and internationally recognized leader in technology transfer. Katharine Ku was the executive director of Stanford's Office of Technology Licensing for 27 years. Under her leadership, the office licensed hundreds of technologies that brought the university $1.8 billion with a B. One of those technologies was Google. Now, Katharine sits on the other side of the table as chief licensing advisor at the law firm Wilson Sonsini Goodrich Rosati. She works with startups to license technologies from universities. I caught up with Katharine during the autumn 2025 annual meeting, and we talked about how she helped grow Stanford's tech licensing office, her philosophy on licensing, and the challenges facing tech transfer offices today. Katharine Ku, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm honored that you asked me.
And you've had an incredible career in technology transfer. So can you start by just sharing how you first got into the field and what drew you to it?
In my early career, I got bored with jobs very easily. I would change jobs almost every year or 2 years. I couldn't find the right fit for me. And so I had taught chemistry. I had worked at Sigma Chemical for a year. I had worked at Monsanto for a few years. I came out to California and I helped run a clinical trial, and that was really boring. So I was always looking for another job. Stanford had a job posting that said patent engineer. And I thought it sounded interesting because I had had a patent at Monsanto and I was an engineer and I sort of had an eclectic background. And they created this position in what's called Sponsored Projects Office to try to help inventors disclose inventions to the university because they knew that the Bayh-Dole law was going to be passed. So this was right at the very end of 1979. So I sort of grew up in the tech transfer profession in the very, very early years.
Wow. It must be just so incredible to look back now and to have really seen this whole field grow from its infancy.
It totally was. My first meeting was in 1980, and there were about 70 people at that meeting. I became very involved in Autumn and became president in 1988 at the time. These were 2-year terms, so it was between 88 and 90. As president, you were supposed to run the annual meeting and, prepare it and all that. And so the annual meeting when I was president was in San Diego, and there were 300 people, and there were more people than we ever imagined at that 300 people conference.
Wow. And I just have to state here that we are currently at the autumn meeting and there are over 2,200 people here, which is record breaking.
Which is amazing. I never thought that people would aspire to do technology transfer, university technology transfer, but they do now.
Yeah. And you spent 27 years leading Stanford's Office of Technology Licensing, during which time the office expanded significantly. So what was your vision for OTL and how did that evolve over time?
So my mentor was Niels Reimers, and I joined the office as just a licensing associate. I became associate director fairly early on. I think he was not that interested in the management of the office. And so every morning, we would talk for about a half an hour, and then I sort of more or less ran the office. He took 2 leaves of absence. One was to help MIT restart their program. And he took a leave of absence to help the University of California. So during those times, I was the acting director. And after the second leave, I thought, I don't want to be acting director all the time. So I ended up going to a biotech company. And then I came back as director. And my vision was much like Neil's. We grew the office as the office revenue could handle and as the workload became bigger and bigger. But of course, Stanford was a unique place. We're very entrepreneurial. And we were always very supportive of the faculty. I think one of the tenets that I learned early on is consult with the faculty. When they come in with an invention disclosure, talk to them and see what they envision for what's going to happen with this technology. And so we believed in marketing the technology. In the olden days, we would call people or write physical letters to people. And once we found a licensee, someone that was interested, we would just license them. Nowadays people do market their technologies broadly, on the website, on their websites. So Neil's always believed in marketing, and he really believed in the philosophy that we should take chances, that we were not a risk-averse legal office, but we were a business office. And so he also wanted to hire people with some business background. I believed in that too. And I feel like we wanted to enable the transfer of technology. I totally am idealistic, and I believed in the mission of the university, or the whole mission of nonprofit, activities in this, moving research results into the private sector. That's the only way these research results, these early stage research results, are going to be used and help the public. So I really believed in that mission. We had a cradle-to-grave kind of approach. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's pros and cons for everything. Our particular view was that if you did the intake for the invention, you could work with that faculty member. You would know the technology by deciding whether you wanted to file a patent or not and follow that prosecution. And then you would be able to market the technology, and you would be able to get the feedback from the outside, whether that technology was valuable or not valuable or too early. And then you would do the license and then maintain that licensing relationship with the licensee. So the cradle-to-grave model is a hard one for people. They have to know so many things along the whole path.
Right.
So I think the industry tech transfer has moved maybe toward functional positions within an office. But the whole vision for the Stanford office was to just get us to do as many licenses as possible. Philosophically, I really believe that you need to do as many licenses, plant as many seeds, because we can't pick the winners. It's very, very hard to tell whether a technology is going to win or not. And most of the factors in helping in its success are not in the tech transfer office's control. They're just external things. And so if you just plant as many seeds, do as many licenses as possible, some of them will pan out, some of them won't. And the marketplace will determine the success or failure.
Right. It's a numbers game.
It's a numbers game for sure. And I feel like most entities need to see a lot of inventions, and they need to do a lot of licenses in order to get the revenue that they hope they'll get.
Have there been, or what are some of the standout commercialization successes that you've worked on that are some of your favorites?
Well, of course, I think many people know that Google came out of Stanford. I didn't do the deal. I managed the office. Everybody else did the deal. Someone in our office thought that search sounded like an interesting area, so he decided to file a patent. And I once asked him, why did you file? And he said, well, it was just a new area, and it seemed like there was potential there. And so, per our usual, we marketed the technology. Nobody essentially was very interested in it. This was a search engine, and there already existed other search engines at the time. And pretty much the market thought those existing search engines were perfectly fine.
Mm.
So the two inventors, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, were really frustrated. And I think that's why they decided to start their company. They thought they had the best search engine in the world. They believed it. We didn't know if it was. And so they started the company. I'm most proud that we did help them start with an exclusive license. We had no idea how to really price it. We took a little bit of equity and we had a yearly fee. We went through the exercise of thinking, should we charge by click-throughs, et cetera. But at the time, even advertisements weren't necessarily the business model. Mm-hmm. So it was, again, too early. But we enabled Google to start with an exclusive license, and they were able to raise some money, and they did what they did. Now, we didn't make them successful. They made themselves successful, but we played an important part at the beginning.
Absolutely. If there was ever a story to illustrate the fact that you cannot predict which ones will be successes, that's probably a great one. And you really spearheaded the creation of the 9 points to consider in licensing university technology. What led you to develop these principles? And if you could tell us a little bit about what they, what that covers and what impact have they had on the field?
So the 9 points was just a happenstance in a way. The Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation had a bunch of stem cell patents. And at the time, they wanted other universities to take licenses to be able to use these stem cells. And my big worry was, well, we're just going to spend all the time giving each other licenses if we have to license other university technology for our professors to do research around. Mm. And so that made me really worried. I talked to my boss, who was the dean of research, and I told him the problem. And he said, we decided that it would be really useful to have a discussion with other similar deans of research and the tech transfer office director in the same room. Now, all of us, of course, individually meet with our own bosses, but to have several at the same level, several deans of research and several tech transfer directors all in one room to talk about what is the purpose of technology transfer? What do we want to accomplish? Okay. So we invited a relatively small group of universities to join. It was, again, somewhat eclectic. We had some privates, we had some publics, some big universities, small universities. And we sat in a room for a day and a half to discuss big picture items. What was the purpose of tech transfer? What did we want to accomplish? And so we had a great meeting. One of the people at the meeting was the head of the American Association of Medical Colleges. And he said, don't just have a nice meeting and all go away and feel good about it. Do something tangible. Put a document together. And we said, okay. So we came up with this intentional 9 points as opposed to 10 points. The first one had to do with we're going to retain the right for our own university people and other university people to practice any invention that a university would file on. So that addressed the immediate problem of the Wisconsin stem cell patents, and Wisconsin was willing to go along with that. One of the second points, I don't remember all the points, but the second point will be that we want to make sure that the technology is developed and that we're going to be conscientious about requiring diligence milestones and diligence so that the licensees are not just going to sit on the technology and not develop it. Mm-hmm. And that was a very thoughtful provision. And I feel like all the universities have been very mindful of making sure that they have the expectation that the licensee is going to do something with the technology.
Right.
There were other provisions, sort of not to work with patent trolls. We called them patent trolls at the time. We also had a provision that we wanted to help underdeveloped populations and countries and try to get the technology out broadly.
Wow. And more than 120 institutions have adopted the 9 points. Have you seen any surprising or impactful ways that universities have applied them?
I felt that this was a pledge of allegiance. There is no enforcement of it. But yes, I think that it was an example of universities understanding the broader mission and the purpose of technology transfer, and that they were willing to sign on to these principles as sort of self-governance. I think that by and large, most universities have sort of abided or followed these principles. And I think it's been a really good thing.
Yeah. Looking around now, what in your view are the biggest challenges facing tech transfer offices today, and how can people navigate them?
So there's pre-today and there's post-today. Even within the last few years, I have felt the tech transfer offices have had more and more responsibility. I mean, it used to be just licensing. And Stanford, in some ways, had the luxury of being able to do licenses because we were in an entrepreneurial environment. We didn't have to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem. But in many, many regions of the U.S., they were looking toward tech transfer to help build this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so the offices started having more and more responsibilities, helping, teaching entrepreneurship, helping startups start, maybe helping them with proof of concept funds. And I feel like the plate has gotten very large for many of these offices. And a lot of times it's a different skill. So they still have to do the basics of licensing technology, getting it out into the private sector, but there was a much broader mandate for them. I think that by and large, they've tried to meet this mandate. Mm-hmm. And now with the new potential challenges for universities in general, I think I'm a little bit concerned that the mandates will now go back to the basics. The universities may not be able to, quote, afford, a venture fund or a proof of concept fund or doing all these perhaps considered extra things that cost money. So I think at the end of the day, it might be a contraction into what the basics were in the first place.
Interesting. But now, as more has been built up around it, the context will be different if that's the case, right?
Right.
Interesting. And you've been a leader also in bridging the gap between universities and industry. So what advice would you give institutions to strengthen those partnerships?
So the partnerships can be viewed either through sponsored research, industrial affiliate programs, or licensing. I'll focus more on the licensing. The interesting thing is, of course, the universities now are all focused on startups. Again, it goes back to the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is going to help the particular geographic region to be economically vibrant. And I find now in my new role of helping startups take licenses from universities that universities have a little bit of a conflict. And I don't know that they even realize it necessarily. But if they make the financial obligations on the startup too onerous, that startup is going to have a harder time to raise money, find investors, find partners. And so if you want to help your startup succeed, you're going to have to pull back a little bit on the financials. If you're focused on the financials and the royalty income, then you may be hurting your startups. So it's a little bit of a trade-off and a huge balancing act.
Absolutely. And now in your role at Wilson Sonsini, how has your perspective on tech transfer evolved, and what kinds of challenges do you help clients navigate?
So it's interesting. In my role, I'm able to work with a lot of universities on the other side. And again, when I was in the university tech transfer community, we all said essentially the same thing. And we probably have many license agreements that are very similar. So similar terms and conditions, but without the economics. And so I feel my perspective is that the universities on the coasts, tend to be, they have a lot of technologies, and some of the biggies can afford to be more aggressive, and they typically are. Whereas again, big picture, in the middle of America, they're trying to develop their ecosystem, and they're happy to find a licensee. And so they're a little bit easier to work with. So I have the geographic perspective. I also think that it depends on, again, where the university sits. If they don't have many takers, they're going to be really anxious and happy to have a taker. And if they have lots of interest in their technologies, then they can afford to be a little bit more aggressive.
Finally, at this point in such a long, successful career, what advice would you give to the next generation of tech transfer professionals?
So I love the profession because it's so interesting. I often say this, that we're at the intersection of technology, science, business, and law, and industry, university, and government. And you can play in any of those fields or parts and still be within your job. And so I think the new tech transfer people, there's a lot to learn. There's endless amount of information and knowledge to learn. And you just have to stay curious and stay cutting edge with everything. The law, the business, and the science, which is a big ask in itself. So it's the best profession because it's so fascinating.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes, I have to think.
Yes.
Well, Katharine Ku, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Katharine, and thank you for listening and spreading the word about this podcast. Subscribe and listen to more episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks also to our producer and digital marketing manager, Carly Dunow, graphics manager, Danny Batchelor, web content and systems manager, Jess Klein, and the FLC staff and community for your support. We'll see you back in 2 weeks for Transfer Files Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.